Coming up on the Takeout, have you heard the State of the Union is tonight? I know you've heard. Previews from former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Arizona Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego. More legal action in the United Kingdom arising from Epstein files disclosures. What about here? Not one new investigation. We discuss with Epstein's survivor, Annie Farmer. Your elections and surveys friend. Hey, he's my friend too. Anthony Salvanto, a brand new CBS News poll on what voters want to hear tonight. It's more on the economy and more on Iran. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. We're on the second floor of our D.C. bureau because Evening News is in town, and with our express written permission, they've taken over the main studio. So we're up here. Hey, new signage. Do you like that? I think it's pretty cool. So tonight's main event. It's a speech. Yes, in primetime. Wall-to-wall TV and internet coverage. Lots of White House pregame hype and opposition party pre-buttal. But it's still just a speech. And very few of these speeches have stood the test of time. Here's one that did. Franklin Roosevelt's 1941 address to Congress outlined 4 freedoms he said the Western world must preserve. Importantly, this speech came 11 months before Pearl Harbor and America's entry into World War II. The 4: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Lyndon Baines Johnson declared a domestic war on poverty in his 1964 State of the Union address. George W. Bush, months after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, described an axis of evil, a raid against the United States in his State of the Union. The axis of evil included Iraq, Iran, North Korea. That speech foreshadowed the Iraq War about a year later. Tonight, Iran may well figure prominently in President Trump's war calculus. His remarks were going to be very carefully vetted and sifted for his intentions, because the U.S. military appears poised to carry out all manner of strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile sites, and potentially other targets. The timeline for such a weighty presidential decision, we are told, is mere days. So, to repeat, the list of historic State of the Union addresses is very short. It's a reminder that few of these speeches change the course of a country or a presidency. In the moment, though, they answer a few questions. Where does a president and the White House advisors around him find themselves politically? Where does the president intend to go? What rhetoric avails to reverse downward trends or maximize a political tailwind? Now, through the decades, there is one constant: your pocketbook, the ever-present theme. In 1947, Harry Truman delivered the very first nationally televised State of the Union. In that address, Truman warned corporations against extravagant profits, and he warned big labor against seeking unreasonable wage demands, all to keep pocketbooks in, to evoke a bygone phrase of that time, fine fettle.
It is up to government to do everything in its power to encourage high-volume production, for that is what makes possible good wages, low prices, and reasonable profits.
No high-definition TV in 1947. You see, wages, prices, super important. That was nearly 80 years ago, proving what was old is new again, or never really old at all, not politically. We begin tonight with our Weijia Jiang at the White House. So, Weij, what are the stakes? What are you looking for?
Well, Major, you're absolutely right. What's old is new. What's new is right now for President Trump, who is not viewing this as just a speech, but really as an opportunity to shape his message ahead of the midterm elections, because that could have major consequences on his presidency. Of course, right now he enjoys control of Congress for Republicans in both chambers, but that is what's at stake here. And so advisors really think this is a chance to deliver his agenda, to deliver his goals for the next 3 years, not just the next year, for the American people. So it's really a chance to try to convince them that they made the right choice when they elected him. So the focus will be exactly the issue that got him reelected here to the White House in large part, of course, the economy. But Major, as we've been reporting, the backdrop of this speech dramatically changed in the past week when the Supreme Court struck down, what the president was banking on to execute his economic vision, his tariffs policy. So tonight, that will also be a big part of his address, perhaps defending that policy, talking about the new way forward because he has no intention of not using them. But, Major, at the end of the day, it really is about convincing the American public that he is making things better for them economically. And I know that you will be getting into all of that with our friend, Anthony Salvanto. But one of the biggest figures that came out of our new poll is that more than half of Americans say the condition of the economy is bad. So that is what the president is up against tonight.
So, Ouija, there's a conversation going on among Republicans whether or not the president tonight should own everything or still say, I inherited a lot of terrible things from President Joe Biden and still look back. Do you have any sense from White House advisors about how he's going to apportion the me part of it versus the Biden part of it?
The me part of it will be a big factor tonight because he's going to tout all of his accomplishments, what they view as things the American people should recognize as victories. But I think it'll be impossible for this president not to mention former President Joe Biden. And that is based on what we have heard since he came into office. Many of his recent speeches about the economy has focused on Biden. And he uses it as an explanation for why there is a disconnect between his policies and what people continue to feel, which is not the instant economic relief that he promised. So he will be asking again the public for more time to fix what he was dealt and more time to build on what he has already planted in terms of the economy, Major.
Presidents sometimes love the word patience. Ouija Jane, thank you so much. Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego is one of the Democrats, about, several dozen, skipping tonight's president's address. Earlier, I spoke with him about that decision, a lot more. Here's our conversation. Senator, there's a theory in politics that in any campaign to come, it's good to know what you're up against. So in that context, why not attend tonight's State of the Union so you know what you and fellow Democrats are up against?
Well, because we do know what we're up against. We're up against an administration that has just made this country sicker and poorer. They just had the Supreme Court overturn the tariffs instead of using it as an out to give some relief to everyday Americans. He's going to double down. Last year, average American spent $1,000, $1,200 more because of these tariffs. They're not getting a refund. The big corporations get a refund. Yet this president is more stubborn than ever to make sure he does that. And at the same time, we see what he's doing right now. He cut Medicaid, kicking millions and millions of Americans off of Medicaid and use that to fund this, overt suppression of Americans in our towns, creating chaos in our neighborhoods, separating families, racial profiling Americans every day, and trying to call it immigration enforcement. We've seen it. We've seen this show before. The president goes and talks about him. He doesn't talk about the State of the Union. And I think there's better things for me to be doing than wasting my time just listening to him just pontificate.
On the economic front, the president's going to remind Americans that when they file their taxes this year, many of them will see a larger refund because of elements of the so-called big, beautiful bill. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. He's going to hammer that hard. Your constituents, I presume, like those refunds.
Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't like refunds? Let's be honest. Of course. But let's also understand where Americans are. For everything that this president is promised and has been passed on the bills, he's actually costing more. If you're the everyday Arizonan that didn't have your premiums extended, your premiums actually just doubled when it comes to Obamacare subsidies. They're talking about thousands of dollars for some families per day. That's not going to be helped by these tax cuts. If you're talking about the family that's got kicked off Medicaid, you're going to have to go and pay cash now, most likely, for your health care and or not go without health care, which is going to end up being expensive in the long run. Let's get back to the tariffs. Americans are paying more and more at everything, whether it's a car, whether it's a home, or whether it's on food, because this president has been irresponsible in his use of tariffs. So I'm sure that some of that will help. It does, without a doubt. This president has caused more economic problems for the everyday American than any other president has in such a short amount of time period.
You know that immigration played a very big role in the 2024 election nationally and in your state. You were able to navigate that, but you also criticized the Biden administration and your party for laxity when it came to border security. Not just the politics, but the policy of the first year of the Trump administration on that issue.
Look, what I was very clear about with the Biden administration is that the uncontrolled border, the allowing of refugees to come and claim asylum and automatically getting to this country that created basically a chain of millions of people also looking at that loophole and being able to use it was a problem and needed to be shut down. The president, Trump, actually, to give credit, did shut down border and legal border crossing. But what he moved from the chaos on our border to the chaos in our streets, where everyday Americans are being racially profiled, where people feel they have to walk around with their passports even though they're U.S. citizens, where 2 Americans were gunned down in only a span of 2 weeks in one city by federal ICE agents. That's not what this country asked for. The country asked for a secure border and for the deportation of criminals, dangerous criminals, not the person that you've known in your community for decades, not the person that has U.S. American citizen sons and daughters, not the person that is a veteran. What they asked for was entirely different from what this administration is giving. And that's why you see the president's numbers are underwater when it comes to immigration enforcement.
Senator, does it feel to you as if this nation's about to go to war with Iran?
Well, I don't have any information that you're not privy to. But when you're moving so many of our assets to the region, when you're moving so many of our jets, so many of our other war-making platforms and capabilities in the region, you're planning for something. And it's sometimes when you go down that road, it's very hard to undo it. But that's not what the American public wants. We're sick of wars. It costs us too much, both in terms of just energy and treasury, but also in the fact that, we'll be sacrificing our men and women for a mission that's unclear. The president's not justified why he's even moving in that direction. Are we going after nuclear weapons? Are we going after terrorists? Are we going after ballistic missiles? Are we doing this to support Israel? None of that has been very clear, and he hasn't abided by the Constitution to actually make that. So until I hear good reasons why we're doing this, something that's existential to the existence of the United States, I feel no reason at all to support another war, especially another dumb war in the Middle East.
Senator, we reported, that is to say CBS News and other outlets today, that the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, is not any longer going to pursue charges against 6 members of Congress, including Mark Kelly, your senior senator from Arizona, your Democratic colleague. What's your reaction to that, and do you still fear on their behalf that the Justice Department could take that matter to another jurisdiction and still pursue an indictment?
Absolutely. Look, I'm glad it's not happening, that the prosecutors are going to stop, at least for now. But it is a big mark on our judicial system and justice system that they targeted U.S. senators that have the right of free speech, that have the protection of speech and debate clause from the Constitution of the United States. The fact that they were going after veterans that were just basically restating what is always known as a veteran, that you do not have to comply with illegal laws, especially those against fellow Americans. It really shows you how far this administration is willing to go to suppress public opinion, especially those that are against this president. And I'm glad it stopped, but I have zero confidence at all that they wouldn't find another way to try to persecute my colleagues.
Arizona Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego. Thank you, sir. Former California Republican Congressman and former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy knows a thing or two about the ritual of the State of the Union. Here is his welcome to President Biden in 2023, and I'm happy to say former Speaker McCarthy joins me now. Great to have you here. Thanks.
Great to be here.
So, what would you say is the political terrain surrounding President Trump tonight, and can he use this speech to change it?
Yes. I mean,
what's the terrain around him?
Well, look, he's got a year in. He's got some real successes, but if you look at the political climate, it looks a little like 2018. And historically, you lose the House. So how do you go out, sell your victories, and be optimistic about the future of why you should continue to govern? So that's a tough place to be, but you own the narrative tonight. Tonight is the prom. It's the Super Bowl, right? Both sides go and try to make their play, but he owns it because he gets to speak. He gets to determine what is said.
Is there a sell-by date on blaming President Biden?
Yes, but the one thing I would tell you is showing a contrast has people to remember, right? I always believe presidential years are aspirational and off-year elections are a report card. So people are going to judge, did you do what you said you were going to do? And the thing is, he's done a great deal, but did you celebrate him, right? You've secured the border. Look what was happening in Puerto Vallarta this weekend. He's 100% right. The cartel's running wild, okay? But did he ever go back down to the border and celebrate what he had done and remind people what is it today? Because you forget in the past.
Not only that, but there is a considerable amount of polling data that shows people have turned the corner on immigration away from the president because of interior enforcement, not the border.
Yeah, and this is a time to sit there. But look, he brought Tom Holman in. He quieted that down. You've got still time to fix that as you go forward. And you want to be able to go that. The economy, you want to remind people that inflation's hard to bring down, but he's done a pretty good job at that. Your prices are low. Show what you've done in the pharmaceuticals. We're the safest we've been since 1900, right? But you got to remind people of it, because it's how people feel. You can have all these data points, but if they don't feel the same way, you're not good.
When you were Speaker, was it a requirement if members asked you that they attend this address, even if it was the president of another party meeting? There'll be like 30 or 40 or 50 House and Senate Democrats who are not going to be there tonight. How do you regard that?
They're wrong. And look, I tell my members when it's not, and I've been to 20 of these
State of the Unions.
And for a long period of time, I was the escort because I was the majority leader and the majority leader. So I would walk with the president, whether in my party or not, spend the time with them before. It's big to any member in here because you get one ticket, you invite the most important person in your district, or you're trying to illustrate something that you're working on. Be an issue, and you bring that person in. It's excitement. The room looks different. They start cooling it down. There's more lights. People stand up, sit down. And from a speaker's point of view, it's different than anybody else. You can hear what everybody says. The crowd, it doesn't pick up on TV, but you see them and you hear them. You're trying to calm them down. They don't realize because they get emotional at that time. Mm-hmm. I've been there where one member stood up and said, "You lie," but the whole crowd was quiet at the time so everybody could hear it. Or there's members that want attention. You get them on both sides of the aisle. Mm-hmm. They wait to try to get that center row just so they can be on TV. You're trying to make sure your members aren't embarrassing, and you want to make sure that you're respectful. Remember, we're coming off the Olympics. This is the 250th anniversary. You can applaud even though the president's of a different party, but he's talking about something that's moving the country forward. I think the country likes that when they see us all together. And
it is an American experience writ large on the floor of the House of Representatives. Let me ask you about something, because you dealt with some very difficult issues internally within the House Republican Conference when you were Speaker. Tony Gonzalez has faced several calls this week to resign. Why? Because Regina Santos Avalos, who was in his employ, says she had an affair with him. She committed suicide. She set herself on fire in shame over this. Gonzalez continues to say he's not going to resign, that the Ethics Committee will handle this. How do you regard this situation?
You know, Congress is a microcosm of society. You have good and bad in every place. It's just like a
Should he resign?
Yes, he should. And look, I think
Fred Upton was on my show last night and said it's very clear. You have any kind of sexual relation with someone in your employ, you're out.
Well, look, if this was in a business, he would have been fired. If you have this knowledge, how do you endorse him? If you didn't know that knowledge and you do now, how do you stay quiet? This young lady committed suicide. It's devastating what has transpired here. She worked for him, and if you look at these emails today, she literally says, "Boss, this is too much." She asked,
"It feels very bad.
Did you pick me?" He said, "I knew you from the chamber." I mean, this is unacceptable. But this is where the leaders of the conference, we would have to step in. You step in these situations to protect everybody else.
Is something missing right now at the leadership level?
Look, I'm not there, but there are situations I had to deal with, from Steve King to others from North Carolina. And
Madison Cawthorn, Matt Gaetz?
Yeah. Well, Matt Gaetz made a motion to remove me from Speaker because he wanted me to step in to the ethics report and try to change it, and I would not. I would sacrifice my job because you've got to be able to have a new standard.
Very quickly, before I let you go, do you expect the president tonight to look down in that well to the House Republicans and Senate Republicans and say, "I'm going to send you tariffs, and I want you to use the reconciliation, which is a simple majority in both chambers, to codify what the Supreme Court just nullified"?
He could. I mean, he's made a very...
Would that be shrewd?
Yeah, he's made a very strong case about this. I think he has a lot of members who were opposed to tariffs, but actually watch what has transpired in this last little bit to show, hey, It's made more investment in America. It's made us stronger. I think he could win a vote on a simple party line. The question is, could they get there? They're having a hard time passing anything. I mean, look, I watched last year that in 3 weeks, they passed more discharge petitions than they did in 30 years. That's not a good sign for the majority party to turn the floor over to Democrats.
Right, because that's the opposition party running the floor against the House leadership, which is never a good sign for a majority, no matter what its size. Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker of the House, always a pleasure, sir.
I'm glad. I'm looking forward. 2 more times I get a robe.
You get a robe. The first ever takeout robe. And he gets it. He gets it. Democratic lawmakers have invited several Epstein survivors to attend the State of the Union tonight. Annie Farmer is one of them. She joins me next. Plus, the president tonight, whoa, my voice is going, could tell the country what he's considering as he reviews a wide array of military options in Iran and what his goals are. We will take a look at what he might say. Plus, brand new CBS News polling on the American mood and the sense of our State of the Union. Our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanta, will have all the numbers, and I hope some hot tea for me. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. Several Epstein survivors will be on Capitol Hill tonight for tonight's State of the Union address. Among them, Annie Farmer. She was invited by California Democratic Congressman and ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia. Annie, thank you for joining us. Just remind my audience, you and your sister Maria's attachment to this very difficult and criminal story.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Major. So my sister, Maria Farmer, was really the first whistleblower in this case. She reported Epstein, Maxwell, and others in this circle of power in 1996 after she was harmed on Les Wexner's property, and she also reported my own abuse at Zora Ranch. And so, part of why I'm here is to remind people just how far back this goes and how long there's been corruption in this case.
You mentioned Les Wexner. He had a deposition, and he said to those who asked him questions, he was never interviewed by the FBI. How does that strike you?
Yeah, it was really disturbing to hear that, just because we know how central of a role he played in the financing of Epstein. People have long said an important piece of uncovering how this operation worked was following the money. And we know a large part of that money leads right back to Les Wexner. And so to think that despite my sister's, very clear description of not only how she was attacked on that property, but also how Wexner's security team threatened her and tried to stop her from leaving. And then we also know Virginia Roberts Giuffre's, talking under oath in a deposition about how he harmed her. And so the fact that the FBI never interviewed him after all of that is very alarming.
You mentioned Zora Ranch. The Attorney General of New Mexico and the state legislature both authorized fresh investigations about what went on there. What's your response to what's going on in New Mexico? And remind my audience, if you could, the Zora Ranch part of this story.
Yes. So I just actually had the opportunity to speak with her and talk about this investigation that's just getting started in New Mexico. And this is where Epstein had a very large property that was extremely isolated. And we know from different survivors' accounts that was one of the places that girls and women were abused and trafficked. And so I think it's really great to see that there are people who are saying, we don't have to wait for the federal government to investigate some of these claims. We actually have the ability to conduct investigations ourselves. And so I think what is happening in New Mexico could really change the course of this entire investigation.
Annie, how have you absorbed what's going on in the United Kingdom with former Prince Andrew and the former ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson?
I feel like watching what's unfolding in the UK is giving us all a lot of hope that even when, people at the highest levels of power, people like royalty, are involved in harming girls and young women, that they can be held accountable. I mean, they are looking at this charge around the misuse of power. And really that is at the heart of this whole case, is how people misuse their power. And so I just feel like we need to be following suit, right? The fact that so many of these crimes occurred on U.S. soil and we're not doing something similar here is really embarrassing.
And yet, at the federal level, not one single new investigation that we are aware of has been opened.
Yes. Yeah. And reporting that there's really, that they were closing this case because there wasn't much to point to further investigation. I think we can all see, people who have had the chance to look through these files, that there are, in fact, lots of things that should be followed up on and investigated.
And is it your belief that there are things yet to be disclosed, interviews in particular, these 302 interview forms that would provide, if released, even more impetus for potential investigations?
I do believe that. We're continuing to hear from lawmakers that even when they go to view the unredacted files, that there are still redactions in place, including, just some pages that are like completely blacked out text. And so, we know also that less than half of the files have actually been released, right? So I think there's still quite a bit of information that needs to come out that would provide really critical information about what happened here, why it was allowed to go on for so long, who enabled the abuse, and who participated.
Would you and your survivor sisters still be open to a meeting at the White House with the president on this?
I'm not holding my breath for an invitation to a meeting like that. We're here today to remind Trump that despite his wish for us to all move on from this case, that we're not going away until the law is followed and we truly have the transparency that we've all been, initially asking for and we're now demanding.
You've said in other interviews, Annie, it's a complex construct coming up with a definition of justice in this space. Help my audience understand how you're trying to wrestle with what it might be defined as. Is it criminal? Is it civil? Is it simply transparency? What combination of those three things?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard because it makes me think about, people like Virginia Roberts Giuffre who cannot be here with us, tonight. What would it mean? Like, how does her family get justice, right? When she's no longer with us, and she's not the only survivor that is no longer with us, right? I think about, my sister Maria Farmer, whose health has been so devastated by 30 years of stress related to what happened to her in this case. And so that's why I think it is very complicated, but certainly having a thorough understanding of what truly transpired is the foundation for then building, I think, the sense of a closure and accountability that we are all craving.
And very quickly, Annie, is part of that knowing the names of those in positions of judicial or Justice Department power who look the other way?
Certainly. I think that's, again, how someone like Virginia would not have been harmed if the appropriate follow-up happened when my sister reported this in 1996, right? So not knowing that there were people who had the power to stop this that didn't, I think we all need to know who those people were.
Annie Farmer, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and I thank you for your time so much.
Oh, it's great to speak with you always. Thanks.
Next, our political panel. You know the big topic, tonight's speech. That's next, here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Political panel time. Let me introduce them to you. Former Press Secretary for Vice President Biden and Democratic strategist Kendra Barkoff-Lamy, and former Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence and Republican strategist Mark Short. Mark, I want to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, fresh off rotator cuff surgery, playing hurt, gamer. So I appreciate you being here, sir.
That's right, thank you.
Very much a gamer. So, Mark, you've been through this process, watching the vice president, watch the president. I want to ask you what I asked Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker of the House. What is the political atmosphere around President Trump? How does he need to change it tonight?
I think that it is kind of similar, as Kevin said, to 2018. I think the dynamics are probably not good politically.
Choppy.
At the least. And I think that the margin in the House is pretty tenuous at best. And I think that the president's two signature issues that he won on the border and the economy, he's both now underwater on. So it's a very difficult.
Is he underwater on those issues because of poor performance or poor communication? Because I know that is the constant conflict in the White House. Well, it's bad policy. No, it's bad communication. What is it?
I think it's both. I think on the first throughout is that he did secure the border. And I think for a lot of Americans, that's what they wanted. But I don't think there was the same support for the deportations. And so I think that's been the challenge of that policy. And on the economy, look, I think he can take a lot of credit for extending tax relief. Markets have been at all-time highs. There's a lot he can talk about, but he wants to continue to focus on his trade war. And I think that that's less popular for a lot of Americans. So I think that on the economic front, the jobs are lagging because of that trade policy, but that's where he wants to continue focusing as opposed to focusing on his achievements of tax relief.
Kendra, take it away.
Well, I was going to say a couple things. I think he called affordability, I think, a Democratic hoax not too long ago. So the fact that he's going to go out there today and try and tout this as a big win for him, as a big issue for him, is very interesting. It's very telling that he is starting to see that the numbers are slipping. There's a midterm election coming up, and he's got to be doing better in order to be able to, secure some of these seats. But look, Americans are really suffering. There are people who are going to the grocery store. They are paying $310 more on average this year than they were last year for groceries. And they are seeing things and they're seeing their paychecks, and it's not going as far. So he's going to go up there and try and talk about this, but he's got to take action as well as talk about it.
He's going to blame your former boss, President Biden, for most, if not all of that. He'll say, I will have stabilized things, but I inherited, and I know the phrase he's used it 100 times, I'm not stealing anything, I inherited a mess.
Well, last I checked my watch, it's been over a year, and he made promises of things he was going to do on day one that he still has not done. So he can go out there and try and blame, my former boss as much as he wants, but the reality is things are not better. Americans are still suffering, and that is on his watch at this point in time.
So you might have heard my conversation with the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, about Tony Gonzalez, member of Congress. My colleague, Tony DeCopel, had an exclusive interview with the Speaker of the House on that very topic. Let's play that sound.
The allegations are, it's detestable what is being alleged. My understanding is he's denied a lot of this, and we're trying to sort it out. Now, it has been reported that the Office of Congressional Conduct is investigating this and has been for some time. And what we do here is we allow all the facts to play out. That's what we must do.
Let all the facts play out. But lots of other members have already made up their minds on this. The text messages do not help Tony Gonzalez's denials at all. If anything, they confirm the terrible story of this aide who alleged an affair and then killed herself as a result. Mark?
I think that there'd probably be a different response if the margin wasn't one vote, which is unfortunate. I think, sadly, today, the character of a lot of our elected representatives in both parties has diminished from what it once was. I think there was a day that any sort of accusation of this nature and basically having the text to confirm it would have been enough to encourage a person to be pushed out of office and encourage the person to resign. So I think it's hard to look at the situation and say that this and not be cynical and say if you had any different margin, there would be a different pressure point from the leadership.
Kendra, the former Speaker McCarthy implied here at this table that there was a leadership vacuum within the House Republican Conference on this.
There's been 6 Republicans who have stepped up, last I checked, to say he needs to go. And good for them for having the courage to do what is right. I wish more were doing that. I do think that this current speaker needs to step up. I think you're right. I think that there is a vote margin here, and they're seeing that play out. But this is a clear abuse of power by a member of Congress and a subordinate staffer. I don't care what the text messages say or don't say. He is her boss, and things should be done completely differently. Nothing should have happened to begin with.
Let me ask you about something that in another time would have been universally and unequivocally unifying. 2 gold medals, 2 teams for representing the United States, women's hockey, men's hockey. And yet we find ourselves with clattering internet divisions over what was said to the women's hockey team by President Trump or implied in his conversation with the men's victorious hockey team. The men came to the White House today. They're going to be, some of them, at the State of the Union tonight. The women were not. Kendra, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I can't wait to see all of those guys who have clearly been enjoying themselves in Miami. I think having some partying and doing that stuff, sitting down and listening to a 2+ hour speech in their suits, probably slightly hungover is my guess. But look, we are in a divisive time, and Trump has an opportunity to step up there and bring everyone together. This is a great opportunity for him to say we're all Americans. We won 2 gold medals. We should all be here unifying, talking about all the great things that we achieved in the Olympics. And he's just not going to do that. We know that.
Mark?
Look, I was there in the first administration serving as his head of legislative affairs. We had a lot of national champions who chose not to be there, including NBA champions. And I think it's unfortunate. I think regardless of who's in the White House, when the president invites you for something unique like that to celebrate you should accept that invitation.
There are those who would say, you know, the women's hockey players don't have a players association like the NHL Players Association. They don't fly on their own jet. They don't have their own baggage handlers. They have to go back to school. Much more logistically difficult for the women's hockey team to make it to the White House. Not impossible, but much more difficult. Mark, any thoughts on that?
I just watched the Miracle again the other day, and those were amateur players at the time and college players. I don't think you need a players association to make that work, Major.
Mark Short, again, a gamer, playing hurt with the wing. I appreciate that. Kendra Barkov-Lammy, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Tensions grow with Iran. The State of the Union might offer the president a chance, if he wants to take it, to make a clearer case for what his intentions are and what the goals might be. We're going to take a look at that next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. As President Trump's deadline for Iran to make a deal on its nuclear weapons or its pursuit thereof, hangs over the State of the Union address, sources tell CBS News the president's grown frustrated with what he's heard in terms of military options. I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Samantha, it's not that there are not a lot of options. There are plenty of options, but they come with caveats that other executed missions in Trump 2.0 haven't had with, because Iran is a different place. Interestingly, today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio had a briefing with the Gang of Eight on Capitol Hill. Tell my audience what the Gang of Eight is, quick reminder, and why you think this is important.
The Gang of Eight are the top leadership from the intel committees and top leadership in Congress. And if the Secretary of State is briefing the Gang of Eight ostensibly on Iran, to me that implies that there's some significant covert element to any operation that the president may be planning, or some new breathtaking intelligence that is so sensitive that only the senior leaders and intelligence leaders in Congress can have access to it. So, of course, we have this massive military buildup right now that is giving the president maximum optionality when it comes to overt military options against Iran. But there's clearly a lot going on that we're just not seeing, and that's a covert action track. I will tell you, it is standard operating procedure for a president to pursue all lines of effort when countering an adversary. Diplomatic, military, covert action. So this is in line with past precedent.
Would I be right, Sam, to be confused when the president said, and he got into a very contentious debate with outsiders about whether or not the facilities in Iran had been obliterated or not? That was his choice of words. He very much clutched onto that obliterated word. But then last week, Steve Witkoff, special envoy, said the Iranians were a very short period of time away from possessing a nuclear weapon. I can't square those. Can you?
There's for years been an ongoing dispute about how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon. That relates to how quickly Iran can, quote unquote, break out to a bomb. They have to have enough of what's called highly enriched uranium, the material that's needed for the nuclear weapon. Then they have to engage in a process called weaponization, which is actually fitting a nuclear warhead onto a missile, making it operational and more. The first question that many people focus on is how much highly enriched uranium do they have? And that's typically what's used to figure out these timelines. But Major, there's a lot of disagreement. There has been for years. The question after the strikes... Even
after the strikes, which the president described as an unqualified success.
Even before the strikes. After the strikes, it is true that the Iranians did lose a lot of the machines needed to make nuclear weapons material called centrifuges. However, they did hold on to a non-insignificant amount of highly enriched uranium. The outstanding question is, has the regime decided that they want to break out to a bomb? What that ties into is the ongoing nuclear negotiations. The president has issued this deadline, I forget what it is now, 10 days or so that they have to come with, ready to make a deal. But behind the scenes, the intelligence community has to be advising the president on whether the regime has or has not decided to break out to a bomb, or to actively engage in these negotiations. So the two discussions are tied together.
And when we report about frustrations for the president in terms of options, those are frustrations other presidents have felt.
They sure are. And, not being in this situation room, there certainly is reporting from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that he did tell the president that U.S. munition stockpiles and air defense systems are depleted and that a prolonged conflict could be difficult. That is the job of the chairman, to brief the president on the current state of resources and the trade-offs of any military operation. If we do engage in not just a limited strike in Iran, but a more expansive and prolonged campaign, that does have implications for our readiness and preparedness to not just defend the homeland, but to proactively engage in other operations around the world.
And that's what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tells any president who asks. And clearly, the questions are being asked and answered. And whatever the attitude of the president is, we'll probably find out in the coming days. Sam Vinograd.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. How do the American people feel about potential U.S. actions in Iran, which we just discussed, or the state of the economy, other Trump administration-related issues? Well, we have exclusive brand new polling with that guy, your friend and mine, CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Brand new CBS News polling shows Americans want to hear more about the economy in President Trump's State of the Union address. Let's bring in CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. So, Anthony, I'm going to give you a laundry list, and you just take it and run.
Go.
State of the country now compared to a year ago. What do people want to hear about? Who should set trade policy? Iran and ICE.
Okay, that's a long list. We're going to get to them all, but I'm going to start with this. What do you want to hear about? Cost of living, the U.S. economy. Now, maybe you say, wait a second, no surprise. These have been the top issues for many years, in fact. But it's not what you talk about in a speech like this. It's how you talk about it. Here's what I mean. Going into this, 60% of the country thinks that when the president describes things with prices and inflation, which have been the top concerns about the economy, they say they think he makes things sound better than they really are. What's important here? I think it's that central dynamic of a president wants to be optimistic, wants to tout their record, the president surely will, but also has to meet the country where they are. And most people say the economy isn't good. They haven't said it's good for years. That's the central tension and really a big key thing to watch. Second part, I asked people, okay, if you were giving the State of the Union, how would you describe things? Top word they used, divided, used by 2/3. That's actually quite similar to how it was when Joe Biden gave his last State of the Union back in 2024, if anything, a little more so. So that division, people's perception of it, has kept on going. And then finally, this. I want to show you because it's really important. State of the country is divided as well, as we said, but look at this difference in optimism going ahead. It's part of the speech, right? Generate that optimism. Republicans, who are more likely to tune in, way more optimistic about the coming years than independents or Democrats, Major.
Now, quickly, Iran and ICE.
Okay, Iran. Here is the key thing I'm watching tonight. Almost 3/4 of the country say they don't think the administration has yet clearly explained the U.S. position on military action against Iran. So we're looking for that, people waiting to hear what exactly the plans are, what exactly the position is. And then finally, I'm going to zoom down here to ICE. This is a dynamic to continue to watch. Big majority of the country thinks that when stopping and detaining people, ICE is being too tough. Listen for that, because this is an issue that really divides Americans. Republicans strongly in support of the deportation program. But this number, over time, heading into the speech, this number has been driving lowering approval of the deportation program overall. When folks think ICE is being too tough, they're more likely to say they don't approve of the program overall, Major.
When I say Anthony Salvanto can go through the numbers, scroll this way and that, contextualize them, explain them, present them like nobody else, that's what I mean, ladies and gentlemen. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, buddy.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is The Takeout, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, just occasionally clever. I'll be back with my colleague Tony DeCopel at 8 p.m. Eastern as we preview the State of the Union. You can watch that starting at 8, and then at 9 o'clock, we have full coverage on the network. The Daily Report coming your way next.